Good afternoon, and welcome to the session, Sudden Collections Coordinators, when you don't know what you don't know. We're a team of librarians from the University of Florida, including two who are still back in Gainesville, and we will introduce ourselves shortly, slide by slide. So just an overview of what we're going to talk about in this session. Today we will offer brief introductions of how we each follow different paths to become collection coordinators, how we develop skills and strategies for collection management, especially in the face of changing collections, and then how to work across departments and with acquisitions and administration, and how to work with vendors. So who are we and how did we get here? Well, we have to start with our home library. The George A. Smathers Library serves the University of Florida, a large R1 research-intensive institute. This land-grant university and major medical center is in the center of Florida. It has a combination of large undergraduate enrollment and also a high number of PhD programs. There are 7 libraries total that are under the George A. Smathers umbrella, meaning we have approximately 60 selectors. We have a lot of resources in various different formats, and our collections budget is around $13 million.
My name is Megan Daly. I'm one of the people connecting virtually, and I'm the Humanities Collections Coordinator, as well as the Classics Philosophy and Religion Liaison Librarian. I earned my PhD in Classics in 2013, and afterwards, while teaching, I got involved in some grant projects at the libraries, and then I was hired as the Librarian of Classics, Philosophy, and Religion in 2017, quickly learned my selector role, and then about a year later became Humanities Collections Coordinator. So I transitioned very quickly from being an academic to being a selector, and finally to being a collections coordinator. So I have about 1.5 years of collections experience. Next slide.
My name is Ariel Pompucius, and I'm the Health Science Center Library Collections Coordinator. I liaise to departments in the College of Medicine, although you guys probably don't care about that as much. My master's is in Library and Information Science. I have previous experience with collections when I was working as a clinical librarian at a small rural hospital, and about 3 years of collection experience.
And hi, my name is Tara Cataldo. I am the Science Collections Coordinator. I am also the Biological and Life Science Subject Specialist. And I'm the veteran of the group. I've been at UF almost 20 years and have been the Collections Coordinator for about 12 of those.
Hi, my name is Trey Schulten. I am the Chair of the Acquisitions and Collection Services Department at the University of Florida. I also happen to co-select the Library Science Fund, which is a tiny fund because we don't have an MLIS program. So I have a MLIS. Formerly, I was the e-resources librarian, and before that, I was a manager in the acquisitions department. I have about 8 years of collections experience, and that's me.
Okay, and I'm Pat Briggs. I'm the Senior Associate Dean for Scholarly Resources and Services. My background actually is journalism, mass communications. My undergrad, I've had a bunch of jobs over the period of time of my life in librarianship. So I've been a selector and I've been responsible for collections in a number of different roles. And right now I work with Trey on our acquisitions and collection support. Okay, and I feel compelled to talk about these pictures for some reason, but this is actually the backside of our Humanities and Social Sciences library on campus. And one of the other slides will show the opposite side of this building. Great shot, I think. Okay, go ahead, Ariel. Okay, so what do you need to be a successful collections manager? This is my 2 cents perception of having been doing this for a while. I think the first one, when you say the knowledge of the disciplines you support, especially true in certain disciplines, I think probably as a journalism guy, I could maybe fake history or English or something to that effect, but I promise you that I cannot support engineering very effectively, or music, or a number of other things that I would not know enough about. Second bullet there, where we talk about effective organizational systems and processes, I think we do a pretty good job of this at UF. I mean, there's always room for improvement. You know, I think it really, especially in light of what we're talking about today, of kind of people that were not prepared to be ending up as collection managers, I think it's really important to have that kind of a structure and a path to follow when they get thrown into these roles. You know, and for everybody else as well, for that matter. I think if I probably had to choose, that third one down is the one that I would say is, to me, is probably one of the most important things. I think what you bring as a selector or a collection manager from your engagement with your faculty and your disciplines and teaching in that discipline and the support that you give your students and that kind of thing really translates to having enough knowledge to be a good collection manager in that area as well. Oddly enough, I was just in a session where they were moving the other way and splitting those two things up, which I thought was odd. But so this last one is, I always hate it when I go somewhere and they say, oh, everything comes down to communication. And I'm not just saying this because I'm a mass communications guy, but I think it really does. So much of it, the importance of communicating with your fellow liaisons, other collection managers, the faculty in your department, acquisitions and collection support and that kind of thing. I just think that really is a vital piece to being successful at this job. And then the other one is, when I mentioned having a mentor, I'm talking about a career mentor, and we're a tenure shop, so we do have career mentors that serve a really important role, I mean, more of a mentor that's worked within collections, and more than one being optimal probably, but having somebody that you can ask questions to and go to for support. Me again. Okay, so what you don't necessarily need, I think Megan must have put this alligator up there because they'd be chomping at me for making that statement. I'm not sure. I know this is controversial to some people, but we have really good examples today of being successful in these roles without it. Is it optimal to have an MLS or a version of that? Yes, it probably is. Have experience, all those other things, the reality of life, as Ariel and Megan will both tell you, that's not the way it always works. Obviously, Ariel has the degree and Megan doesn't have the MLS. So, now, all that being said, we generally we try not to throw people directly into that. But again, we have some examples of that being successful here today. So, next one. Okay, evolving collections. This is the other side of that building, actually looking at the front door of our Humanities and Social Sciences Library from out on the plaza that's in front of
They can hear them.
building. Am I still there?
You're still.
Okay. I wasn't sure if I could still have the
farther away from his
microphone
mouth.
on. Okay. So, not here. Coming.
Back off the mic a little bit. They can hear you over there, sorry.
Okay. All right, I'll talk a little quieter.
Or just,
I'm a loud Irishman and I
Or just
generally...
hang it, yeah, there you
Is
go.
that still where you can hear me?
Oh, yeah.
I'll hold it. Okay. I could probably do this without a microphone at all if you weren't recording it. But, so I don't think anything real earth-shattering here, but, we talk about, I think probably pretty much the same with everybody, that 85% of our total materials purchases, I think that's a relatively common number that people see, that's how much of our materials budgets are there. Obviously, big deals and large multidisciplinary databases dominate the landscape. I think that we're seeing maybe some cracks in that big deal piece of that right now, maybe moving away, the pendulum moving away from that. I think of all these, as I was thinking through the shrinking or the already shrunken budgets that we're dealing with as far as like firm order budgets and book budgets, as I thought about this, I guess I never really thought about it this way before until we started to put this thing together, of how much more importance that puts on the decisions that selectors are making, because you have less to deal with, less money, less budget to deal with, but at the end of the day, every one of your decisions actually is a little bit more important. What else is on this slide? So we've got obviously variations in approach based on discipline over time as we've gotten digital. You know, the idea that this is what the sciences or the health sciences purchase versus humanities and social sciences, it's dealt with a very different way when you're making collections decisions. And at UF, you know, we've jumped all into the UDA, PDA, demand-driven things. I don't know, Trey, how many do we have? 15 or something?
Maybe we're down to 12.
Yeah, but I think that we still have done a pretty good job, at least from the downturn, the economic downturn, all the firm order budgets got really hit hard, the book budgets. We've tried to raise those back up and maintain them so the selectors and the liaisons still have, you know, the human piece of that. It's not all just, okay, the immediate need of a patron that's clicking on it, so we purchase it. We have them weighing in and saying, this is something important that we should have, that people should know about, or that we should add to the collection.
Sure.
So I'm going to touch on a lot of the same themes that Pat just touched on, but maybe in a little more detail. So there's been a lot of centralization over just the 8 years I've been at UF. So the acquisitions department is now the acquisitions and collection services department. That's not necessarily any additional duties that we gain, but it's sort of a recognition, there we go, of some of the work we were already doing, right? Also, so traditionally, the subject librarians, they were called the selectors, right? And now we're calling them liaisons. It's not a new trend, but it's something that's continuing to grow. And the firm order funds, the discretionary funds that we do have, that they have direct control over, those have shrunk so much just since I've been there. I know they shrunk prior to my arrival too. Part of that is big deals with the serials and the continuations, shrinking their control there. Budget cuts for firm order funds, things like that. And then even a lot of those decisions for resource purchases are not made by individual selectors anymore. They're made either with groupthink that we'll talk about a little bit later, especially Ariel and Megan and Tara will talk about that. Or maybe just at the sort of, we call them budget centers, so, you know, a discipline-based budgeting model, so they're made at that budget level by people like Ariel and her colleagues. And then even within that, some of the budget centers share funds, either within a budget center or across disciplines, so that pot is just shrinking of what they actually have direct control over. So my job is to help them strategize and help the library strategize of how we take the limited funding we have with all the commitments we already have and then the little bit of discretionary we have to actually make collections work, hopefully, most of the days, right? And then obviously PDA, those things have helped us in so many ways and helped reduce cost per use, and they're really great programs. They take a lot of the time that selectors used to have to spend going through, you know, manual paper slips back in the day, or really not that long ago, to, you know, electronic slips now. That's all taken away, but that's also taken away some of their funding because these plans are so successful that we have to fund them somehow. So, yeah, it's a balance. So that's just some of the ways that collections have been centralized over the years.
Okay, and now we will talk about growing into the roles in the collection and management process. So I am a newbie and the non-MLIS member of the group. So I'm coming from an academic perspective at my role as someone who's done intense, in-depth, and prolonged research in my specialty area, but I've not earned the MLIS. So after a quick dive into my selectors role, I inherited my predecessor's collections coordinator role after about a year, and my learning process has been extremely aided by listening, asking lots of questions, and going to every meeting and training possible. And then I've been unofficially mentored by my colleague who is the social sciences collections coordinator, since we often meet very informally and discuss new collections concerns that pop up every now and then. And recently I've been learning through a new leadership role because I lead selectors meetings for my department, and this forces me to think from yet another perspective that of my colleagues and what their needs are and what their questions are. So from my background, I've found that I can be a big help to beginners because I know what it feels like to start out from square one with no MLIS background. And in fact, as an example, I recently helped a new colleague who also is an academic from a non-MLIS background. I helped her get started as a selector. Next slide.
So I had done some work in collections as a clinical librarian, but our hospital was very small and our journal's budget was very small. So when I came into academia at a big institution, I casually expressed an interest in continuing to do collections, and they said, oh great, we need someone for that. So I had 2 years of training under the previous collections manager at the Health Science Center Library. Thank goodness, because I'd come from a very small puddle to a very big lake. And when she retired, I realized quickly that I had missed some information and I had not learned everything that I needed to know. There was a great deal of institutional knowledge that she wasn't able to pass down. There were subscriptions that she and some of the colleges knew about, but that nobody had told the rest of us about how that worked. And there was not really a centralized system for notification, so sometimes she got emails reminding her about renewals, or I'd get emails, or sometimes the emails got lost and then people would be upset because their renewals weren't being processed. So trying to figure out who was the person who needed to be contacted for things. The current state of our collection, we have an overpacked subscription list where renewal increases likely mean cancellations because the money tree isn't growing. And then we've had many, many years of no monograph budget at all, which we were saved by UDA, PDA, DDA programs, but there are other aspects of our collection that are a little bit outdated.
And I started on a similar path to Ariel in that I was subject specialist and then informally mentored by the previous collections coordinator and then took over that role when he retired. And over the years, I moved that from an informal process to a pretty formal one. And I've trained many new librarians on their collections roles, everything from a librarian who is a PhD in chemistry and absolutely no library experience to brand new MLS graduates and everybody in between. And the two at the opposite ends of the spectrum, I always start off at the same point. I always let assure those with the PhD but no MLS that they are starting at the ground, because this is a very hands-on, work-driven type of part of their role that they have to learn. And the best place for that training ground is projects, ones like reading or a gift review, something that gets their hands physically in a collection, searching the catalog and in spreadsheets, and gets them all those pieces together, and will inevitably bring up the issues they need to learn about access around collections. And as opposed to when we are training someone for public services on our desk, which is very intensive, short training period where they spend a lot of time at our service points and are let loose in 1 to 2 months, the collection manager's training list, it takes 12 to 18 months before we check everything off. And we go to the next slide, we will show a few things on that list. These are a few of the broader categories. The actual checklist for collection managers is about 3 pages long. But except for the first 2 items on that list, going over the acquisitions and how it works, and our timelines and budgets, all the other pieces are driven about where we are in the fiscal year and what's going on, and what projects we have going on. And I will not even train a new librarian on how to buy an ebook if we are in the period of the fiscal year where the accounts are closed. That's just inefficient. So that's one of the reasons it takes how project-driven the training is, but between 12 and 18 months is when we kind of finish and check everything off on the list. Now, we're going to put that back to Megan, who just introduce us to what this looks like.
Great. So in my library, we have 13 individual selectors that have their own sets of budgets to work with, and they do it rather independently. but they're overseen by two collections coordinators, myself for the humanities, and my colleague who manages the social sciences and the business. So as coordinators, we keep an eye on the budgets overall, the endowment funds, and large or collaborative purchases. And then once a month, we come together at these meetings that I already mentioned to discuss current issues, to have reminders or refreshers about the selection process, to make collective decisions, and then coordinate with other folks within the collection development process. Next slide.
Question about the last slide.
Oh, yes.
The individual selectors get a database. Is it open to everyone on campus, or is it specific to their department?
All of our resources are purchased for everyone on campus.
Thank you.
So because the HSC budget, HSCL budget is so tight, and the range of the 6 colleges and many departments within those colleges that we serve is so large and varied, everyone in our library wants to be involved in collection decisions. So every decision about budget allocations for the Health Science Center Library is decided unanimously by all selectors, or at least discussed to a majority, with plenty of adaptation and compromise along the way. And every major increased renewal notice is reviewed by all the selectors as well, and cancellations are approved, just to make sure that the 6 various colleges that we serve are still being effectively covered by our resources. We know that if a journal is canceled, patrons will notice and come to their selectors, so selectors want to know what's happening and be involved. The pros of this system is that every selector is aware of and contributing to collections decisions. There's a lot of transparency. Lots of transparency. However, it takes a lot longer to reach consensus. So if a decision needs to be made quickly, it can be a struggle. Sarah?
Okay, so, every collections unit develops its own culture and its own evolutionary path. And where we've led to in the science library is we now have 12 librarians and only 3 collections funds. And part of this has been that shrinking of the pots as we rolled money into the big journal packages, into EBAs, but part of it was strategic on our part as well, and that we were very aware of the interdisciplinary aspect that research was turning to at our university, and it just became inefficient to have a fund just for entomology when requests for entomology materials could be coming from agriculture, botany, microbiology, infectious disease. So that was strategic on our part as well. Another part of that evolution was my role as the collections coordinator. My time in collections grew to where I'm spending 40 to 50% of my time there, while the other subject selectors in science are down to 5 to 10% of their time. And I spend a lot of that time monitoring those funds and making sure that they're spent equitably. Don't want the engineering librarian spending all the money and the agricultural librarians getting nothing in 1 year. So I do that, and I do a lot of data gathering so that a selector only has to spend within amount of time in decision making, such as when a journal comes in at a 15% increase, it gets flagged for review. I gather all the data that they need, whether it's print or electronic, all the usage we can, present everything for the selector, and so the selector has to spend maybe 10, 15 minutes thinking about it, looking about it, and then making their decision. Now, I do like to think that our unit has a sort of hive mind, but I'm definitely not the queen bee of that unit. The term coordinator is really the appropriate term for all of us in this role. We are the communicators and the consensus makers. That's what makes this model work. Hopefully, creating more efficiencies both for the subject specialists and for Trey's folks in acquisitions.
Okay, continue with my compulsion about explaining the picture.
Sorry.
This is actually the ground floor of our science library that we took from a kind of a dingy, dark space that was all gov docs and some other stuff down there a few years ago. and renovated it and added about 700 seats to that floor. And this is the way it looks pretty much every time you walk down there. It's full to the brim with people. So I think no matter how much space we would provide, that it would fill up as soon as we provided the space. With as many students as we have, we're very heavily used, libraries are heavily used. You know, one thing that came across to me, maybe we kind of said it somewhere, but just to clarify if there's confusion. So Megan is over Health Science Center library budget.
Or, sorry, Ariel.
Ariel's over Health Science Center library budget. Megan is over humanities. Terry's over science, and then we have somebody who's not here that's over social science and business. And so when they're talking about some of the details of the numbers of selectors and that kind of thing, in some of these slides, they're talking within their individual area, adding up to that number of 60 or whatever we said, approximately 60 early on. So I just want to clarify that because it was almost kind of confusing to me, although maybe not to others. Okay, so working with administration, you know, I come out of the corporate world, and I always used to actually be happy when people that were department heads would be advocating for their little piece of the pie. And sometimes that can happen in this environment as well, where, you know, as a selector or liaison, or even as a not so much probably with the collections coordinators, but you know, you get real focused on your little piece of it and sometimes don't think about it. And I'm happy for that because I want people advocating for what they think they need for their disciplines. But at some level, you kind of need to keep in mind that there's a lot of moving pieces that make up the larger library budget. You know, there's always competing priorities. So, you know, you have to say, as far as the deans go, we'll always look at it and say, okay, we have people, we have buildings, we have collections, are the three biggies. And somehow we need to kind of have those, you know, we need to come up with a philosophy of what's important. And it's hard to balance, but at the level of selectors and collection managers, they're very focused on that piece of it. I get a lot of people saying, well, we're renovating a space, but we don't have enough money for collections. Well, there's a lot of backstory to that you might not be aware of. So that competing priorities things. The utilizing of endowments, I think Ariel, maybe if somebody mentioned something about endowments earlier, some really unique challenges with managing that part of the budget. It was on the top of my mind when I put these slides together because I just did an underutilization report that I got from the foundation saying, why haven't we spent this money out of our endowments? And it's real easy as a selector or as a collections person to really be focused on kind of that core piece of that appropriated funds that you have in your budget. And the endowment funds are kind of sitting off to the side. So it's one of those things that, from the administration perspective, I think we're much more conscious of that, especially now that the legislature is looking at why do you carry all this money in these endowments for, and you must not need it if you don't spend it. So the last thing, chain of command. I'm an Old Navy guy, so I just think it's really important. I made mention in an earlier slide about the importance of kind of the structure and the processes. And it really can get confusing, especially on some of these things that these guys deal with where there's multiple selectors involved and they're all kind of getting together and trying to figure out how they can pool money to buy this thing, or all those things that can happen during the process of selecting and acquiring and going through that process. That whole chain of command thing is really important to be able to connect the dots between what's going on at any point in time.
Yeah. So a big part of my job is working with the selectors and the collections coordinators. I think one of my favorite parts of my job, actually. But I have to continuously remind myself that, especially, Tara's been doing this for a while. She knows how things work. But if we bring in a new collections coordinator or a new selector, they don't know what they don't know. Even if they do know what's what, they're not in it every day. This is not their primary job. It's maybe 5 or 10% of their job duties. So I have to remind myself to have patience sometimes, because I am in it every day and I keep it all, for the most part, in my head, with some help from a lot of wonderful people in my department. So I just have to remind myself that it's okay if they don't understand every nuance of every package and whatnot. It's an inherently collaborative process. You have to have two-way communication. It's important for the selectors or the collections coordinators to communicate with me when they're planning, or maybe they reached out to a vendor to ask a question. I need to kind of know what they're doing. And similarly, I need to tell them what's happening, what's going on with that consortial deal. Why shouldn't you talk to that vendor right now? Because we're negotiating this big package over here, right? So we also have an email list that we use to help with some of that communication. And then we have a little collections committee that also helps with that. That's primarily the collections coordinators that we've been talking about today. Obviously, we're always trying to refine our systems and our processes. That's just an ongoing thing. We have a pretty good system, but it can always be better, right? Especially collections change constantly. The world of collections is in flux, so how we deal with things has to change as well. So we try to provide training and support, not just for new selectors, but for selectors who've been there for a while. And then also just establishing who does what. What are the expectations for your role versus my role? What are the boundaries? I'll talk about vendor relations a little bit later, but I think that's a big area for boundary setting. When you have distinct roles in the libraries and everybody's wanting to talk to the same vendor, how do we deal with that? And it's going to change. It's going to vary from every institution, right? So that's why I'm not getting specific here, but you have to, what is it at your institution?
Okay, and then to talk about working with acquisitions from the standpoint of being a new selector or a new coordinator, in order to connect and communicate well, it's important to learn who is who in acquisitions and who does what, obviously. And having an organizational chart can really help people visualize and learn the order of things. So people can contact the correct contact in the acquisitions department for the proper issues. And this also helps with the understanding of what questions should actually be asked from the acquisitions department and which questions should be directed towards other departments. And then to keep people from asking the same questions over and over again, what we've done is we've developed some handouts that can be particularly helpful, especially if they have detailed instructions or screenshots of what the selector or coordinator needs to be doing. And then LibGuides have proved very helpful as well for the same reasons. And we can distribute these at initial trainings and refresher sessions and things like that to keep people in touch with the selection process. Next.
So, like I said, we're going to talk about vendor relations just very briefly.
Quickly, yeah.
Very quickly. So, again, who's talking to who, and does everyone know who's talking to who, and when, and why, and what's going on? It's just so important. Who handles what issues? If you have an access issue and Ariel contacts the vendor or the aggregator to tell them, oh, I can't get in, and the e-resources unit doesn't know about that, well, maybe the issue got fixed, but not that that's happened. Ariel's never done that. But just as an example, the importance of communication and collaboration. And then what's appropriate to communicate to vendors? So maybe I've told all the collections coordinators that we have a big budget cut coming this year. Maybe it's not the best thing to go run out and tell all the publishers that we're going to have big budget cuts this year, or we're thinking about cutting your package. And similarly, when is it appropriate to communicate out to our stakeholders, our faculty? Oh my gosh, we have a budget cut. We're thinking about cutting package X. Maybe we shouldn't tell them until we're really sure we're cutting package X, right? We don't want the faculty and the chemistry department freaking out because of whatever, right? So that's my 2 cents.
So when I first started collections, it took me a while to kind of figure out how to communicate with vendors in a positive way as a collections coordinator. And eventually someone told me, like, it's a partnership, but libraries are still the customer. One of the key things that I learned was it's okay to say no, because it saves everyone so much time. If you can say, no, instead of doing the maybe dance back and forth of like, well, it's important to communicate early and quickly if there's going to be any issues or if there's issues with access. You don't want to accidentally lose an email and then someone's like, where's our renewal? You haven't talked to us about this. If you want your vendors to communicate early and quickly with you, then make sure you do the same. Also setting this clear expectations and boundaries, especially communication guidelines, like who gets contacted about what issues. What works best for you time-wise and what you expect as a partner. And then you won't get what you don't ask for. So That includes trials, trainings, but also discounts. So working with your vendors to alleviate pain points for both of you as much as possible. So we had some discussion questions, so you're right on time.
You had said you talked to vendors, you discussed pricing, or discussed other things. You were talking about consortia deals and all kinds of different big buys, packages, etc. Do you have clearly defined limitations to where she doesn't do packages, you do packages, the other selection coordinators don't do packages, you do packages? How does that work?
It's a lot fuzzier than that, unfortunately. I deal with all the consortial issues for the most part, for sure. I mean, with Pat, and it's a discussion. I coordinate the consortial issues. Maybe that's a better way to put it.
And the very large packages are done on a different level. Trey is involved in a lot of that, in the negotiation piece, but the individual collection managers and selectors, Elsevier's Springer.
Yeah.
So who signs the licenses?
Pat signs all the licenses for our libraries. They're reviewed by my department, and then they're forwarded to Pat for final review and signature. I tell a lot of our selectors, you can go, you can talk to the vendors all you want. Ask about their products. If you want pricing, I'd like to know that you're asking about pricing, but sure, go ahead and ask. If you get a license or an invoice, you've gone way too far. That's like the simplest version, and it's all muddy in between that. And it depends.
So do you also bring in a lawyer to look at all the licenses?
So what we do on the real large licenses, again, Springer, Wiley, and the really large, over $500,000, it goes to General Counsel's office to sign off on those, the University General Counsel. And a lot of those are consortial, a lot of those we do with the other universities in the state and that kind of thing. But yes, on the big ones, on the ones that are below that level, we have somebody that Trey's knowledgeable about it. We have a specific person that reviews all the licenses and knows what to look for. And he does it before I get it because I'm not smart enough to figure them out, but he knows what to look for specifically. And I have certain little things that I kind of look for, but the big ones go to GC's office.
All right, thank you.
So does anyone else have questions? Yes?
Yeah, you were talking about endowment funds versus, say, GA funds. Do you have like a commitment from your selectors that you have to have, like you have to spend the endowment funds first before they spend out GA funds?
No, but I'm thinking about doing that. No, the problem with the endowments is so many of them have restrictions. And so they can only be spent in a very specific way. But we do have, they have total leeway over how they do it, to be honest with you. And it's not so tied to the fiscal year the same way. So it's not like, at the end of the year you have to spend out X. I'd love for that to be the case, and I'm probably going to have to try and push for a little bit more of that. But they have a lot of, we call them fund managers. So, we might have 3 or 4 funds that support a certain subject area, and they have responsibility for those. But we really leave that a lot up to them. Now they're coming a little bit under the microscope a little bit more, so we're going to have to just make really sure that we do spend those out.
For the Health Science Center Library, we're having the same conversation of trying to figure out how to use it for collections, because otherwise we won't have enough money for autographs. So, yeah. Any other questions? Oh yes.
You said that you're coordinators rather than queen bees.
Yes. I would say Tara would be the, she's not a queen bee, she's a coordinator.
So what do you do when someone in your group has a competitive rather than a cooperative orientation? We went to pooled funds 1 year and 2 librarians went to serve and spent half the fund because they felt like they'd been disrespected for years and they needed to file.
They're making up for it.
Yeah.
Did you hear the question, Tara?
No.
Okay. The question was, what happens when your group has some librarians who are competitive and not necessarily collaborative?
I've yet to have a situation, and we certainly do not agree all the time, but where we couldn't reach a majority in rules. And with enough discussion and, again, and data, we're all big about the data and show us numbers, that the ones on the side that is not getting what they want are still, okay with it, because, they can see the big picture, they were part of the whole discussion. It just happened to be that there's only 2 of them like that, and 10 wanted it this way, and so that would happen with the way the 10 people wanted.
And Tara also tracks that firm order fund multiple times, like I guess monthly. They can't hear us, by the way. That's why.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Yeah, we can hear them. They can't hear us, unfortunately. But so she tracks that fund throughout the year. And if one of the engineering librarians decides to go crazy, then she'll cut them off, and then acquisitions will cut them off when Tara says cut them off. So it's pretty easy that way.
In a lot of the model, a lot of the way things are purchased, it's not like you have a big fund that people can just randomly go in and decide they're going to spend it. I mean, it's divided. I mean, there are some cases where there's pooled funds, but in the majority of what they're purchasing, it's funds specifically to their discipline. Again, with some exceptions, but it would be, if you're going to start spending out of that pooled one, like what they have with Tara overseas in the sciences, and I guess health science does something too, you can't just go in, because they're not going to approve it if somebody's going crazy. It's just not going to go through the process.
So I see we have one more question, but unfortunately we are out of time, and I think they have to come and put something else in this room, so we will talk to you after. Thank you guys so much for coming and for